Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone. Welcome to the long-awaited pre-training camp Rider Rumblings. After nearly 600 days, we can finally talk about the Rough Riders returning to the field rather imminently. With that in mind, I have with us our venerable football writer, Murray McCormick, who will handle the entire podcast while I drink water. It's been a long time since we covered a football game, November 17th, 2019. I Normally I'm kind of a sourpuss with regards to training camp. Yeah, it's an exciting time in most years, but it's like, okay, let's just get to the regular season. I want to just get done with finish with the appetizers and get to the main course right away. This is the most I've looked forward to a training camp since I was about 12. What are your sentiments?
I kind of feel the same way, and if I can really admit it, I'm kind of sad I'm not in Saskatoon. I know it's the
I'm
protocol.
sad you're not in Saskatoon too, Mer.
I know. I kind of wish I was in Saskatoon for training camp. People will know the my other persona, the football foodie, sure likes to eat out and enjoy a good meal, and it's also kind of looking forward to getting away. I've been here since I haven't gone anywhere since March 8th, 2020, when we got back from Mexico. But yeah, I'm excited, and it's kind of a different sort of excitement. Like, who thought we'd be here where we are with the coronavirus? Like, I never thought we'd be pondering on, we go to Sunday, we won't have to wear masks, we're going to have unlimited crowds. We just kind of always made these huge strides in the last month that it's still hard to get your head around the fact that we may be normal by the time the Rough Riders play a home game on August 6th. We may be just a regular, like, it will never be regular. I know that, but we'll always be kind of wondering. But yeah, you gave me a little bit of a pep talk yesterday but I forgot about the preparations for training camp and everything about all the things that go into that. And it gave me a pep talk and kind of got me going. So,
well, I'm going to bring you down today then, so I can't let you feel too good about things.
Yeah, because we really have to go with who we really are, and we really are a couple of cynics and sourpusses. And to be optimistic and always smiling and looking forward to things really goes against a whole lot of our backgrounds. But it is exciting, and there are reasons for excitement. I'm reasons gatherings, seeing people. I don't think I've been around more than 5 people. Well, sorry, my family, or not at 12 or 11 of us. That's the biggest crowd I've been around since football ended. So it's going to be a whole other world.
Well, you know what was neat? The other night I went and watched the Regina Ladies Softball Association at the Douglas Park Diamonds. And there was like 20, 30 people watching the game. And it was so cool to watch a softball game, to watch a live sporting event. Didn't matter that there were, only 30 people there. It was just exhilarating to just sit there and watch pitching and batting and, hearing the cheering and only the catcher was wearing a mask. And so I can't imagine what it's going to be like on Saturday with, I think, this as big a testament to normalcy as we can have in Saskatchewan. And then Sunday will really, it's interesting the way the timing works, because Saturday there will be some restrictions, and then day 2 it'll be okay. Yeah. I think it should resemble normalcy to more of a degree, and at least the masks potentially can be shed. There'll still be a lot of restrictions, as like, for example, no fans are allowed at training camp, at least for the first week, and all the interviews, etc., will be done via Zoom. So there'll be some differences that the media will have to get used to. And what we got to remember too is that more than ever, we're the eyes and ears of the public. Nobody can go to the training camp workouts, at least in the early stages. So I think we have an obligation. Well, actually, I don't. You have an obligation.
Yeah. Does that mean you're going to start watching practice?
I'm going to watch practice and also text all my friends, which won't take long. So I mean, it's what really hit me too the other night, watching the Stanley Cup final and seeing the Tampa Bay fans rejoicing and nary an empty seat in the entire building. It's like, okay, is that what Mosaic Stadium is going to look like on August 6th? And for the first, 4 home games, for the first 4 games of the season, which are all at home, we're so used to being encumbered by. There's still only one direction we can walk around Wascana Lake, for example. We're going to go from that within the space of a month to potentially 33,000 plus people at Mosaic Stadium. So it's such a rapid flicking of the switch, and not without risk, not without some apprehension, because there's no precedent for this in our lifetimes. But we'll be going from 0 to 60 pretty quickly around here.
especially a month ago, we probably wouldn't even consider there might be a few 1,000 fans in the stands if there are that many. Like we kind of were anticipating you and I might have the most choice seats in the province that we could be actually at the game. There weren't going to be anybody there. To go right now to 33,000 is just sort of crazy. Like, yeah, let's bring it on. People are still going to have to adapt. I know people are like saying cash is not going to be really used anymore. It's all going to be, I think it's all going to be in debit and ATMs and stuff. It's going to be a whole other world on how you buy a drink and that kind of stuff. So there's going to be some real adaptations for fans going to games. But I think
use Bitcoin.
I think we've been dealing enough with the coronavirus and what we've had to adjust to now that it maybe doesn't seem as big a deal. Like, you're used to paying. Like, I've had a $20 bill in my wallet since the pandemic started, and I finally broke it the other day because I just never use money anymore. So it's going to be people going to games are going to have to remember to bring their credit cards with them and be prepared to spend money that way. So there's going to be adaptations. There's going to be going to the games, and I think I touched on that in the paper that there's going to be no on-field entertainment. Everything is about mitigating.
I've covered seasons when there's been no on-field entertainment, Murph.
Yeah, between
Isn't that like 2015 to us? Sorry.
I remember that one, yeah. There'll be no cheerleaders.
So priceless.
Yeah, there'll be no cheerleaders. I think this is one of the longer conversations we've had face-to-face too, but we're on the other side. Anyway, there'll be no cheerleaders. I'm not 100% sure if Gainers are allowed on the field.
Gainers on the concourse, I think.
I think on the concourse. So all those things that you've been go to games and you're used to seeing, it's just going to be the players on the field. So that's going to be an adaptation. I'm sure the riders are all preparing some way to keep people engaged between plays, but it's going to be wild. And I've said this before. If you don't end up a little teary-eyed, a little choked up on that day, I don't think I get choked up talking about it. I don't think you're human. I don't think you realize what's going on in this world and how many things have been taken away from us and we've lost and friends we've lost.
Yeah, I mean, ordinarily we would be saying hello to Warren Woods in the press box, and Warren would be on the second row on the far north end of the press box. Mm-hmm. Always sat in the same place, and it'll be weird going to a Rider game and not seeing Warren Woods there. And it's really so many people have been touched by this, and my sister's entire family got sick. We all know somebody, and so hopefully we can think of them with a bit of a smile and give them a nod, and then know that at least there's going to be better days ahead, and have an appreciation for things that we once took for granted. Going to training camp. I don't
think you've been in 8 years.
It's always been in Saskatoon. I went once when we went up there to shoot a video, but it'll be neat to see training camp again. And I used to go every day with my dog Snowball when I was in elementary and high school, and they practiced out at the U of R. So I'm not allowed to take candy this time, but.
Well, I know you're not going to be able to rip a preseason game, your traditional rip job on.
Yeah, it's usually, this is terrible. Let's get to the opener. Who are these guys?
And you look at how long they're going to be in camp for, and I've seen how structured camp is. That's going to be an adjustment for the players because they've had for the 600 days it's been rather free, as normal human beings. And now for how long is it starts on the 10th and it runs through to maybe I'm thinking the end of the month. That's a long time because training camp is scripted. There's no time for free time to enjoy the pool or something like that. It's just that every moment is accounted for, and the coaches are catching up on 2 years. So it'll be interesting to see how the players get through the long grind and what coaches do to give them a break from all of that. And they're playing football and they're practicing football, which they love to do, but it's still a long haul without a day
coaches.
off.
I don't think there'll be guest coaches anymore, so that's going to be interesting. Let's delve into what the coaches are going to have to look at. What are the big questions that you have going into camp? There's
who is going to be the starting quarterback, Rob? That's the big question.
Well, there's questions about Cody Fajardo and that can he do it again?
That's the big question.
That's a big question. But there's going to be a lot of interest in who's number two. Isaac Harker, I think, has proven that he can certainly answer the bell if need be. He won one of the most important regular season home games I've ever been to on November 2nd, 2019, beating helping the Riders beat Edmonton, going 23 for 28 for 213 yards. So, and engineering what turned out to be a game-winning drive. But suddenly there's Paxton Lynch in town,
Yes.
and there's Mason Fine, and there's Tom Flacco. So, wading through all that, who is number 2? And they're only likely going to be dressing 2 quarterbacks this year. Exactly. So that's going to be interesting to follow.
Especially Paxton Links. Like I before Paxton Links showed up, I'd kind of assumed that Isaac Harker was the number 2 guy. And I still think he is second on the depth chart right now to Paxton Links shows something. But a former first round pick with some pretty good credentials other than what he did on the field, because obviously he didn't do very well on the field. He didn't kind of live up to as being a first round pick. But I'm really curious to see. I've mentioned, and I guess I should have done some journalistic work. Has there been a 6'7" quarterback in the CFL in our lifetime? No, not my time. 6'7", 240. That's a massive man. And
well, they've got a defensive end, Pete Robertson, in camp, who's 243 pounds. So they have a defensive end whose weight is equal to that of a quarterback.
He's kind of like.
There's 5, 6. The tallest players in camp. There's 5 who are 6'7". 4 of them are offensive linemen, and then there's Paxton Lynch.
So what kind of 6'7" quarterback? How mobile? But he's mobile. We'll see the story coming in a little while. I talked to a former rider who played at Memphis with Paxton Links and was at training.
You're thinking about golf again.
Sorry?
You said Links. You're thinking about golf again.
I must be thinking of it. Geez, don't say I'd love to be golfing today. He played with Paxton Lynch at Memphis, and he was also at training camp, and we'll bring this name up, Vince Young, probably one of the most, unfortunate or bust. Like, is he a bust? I don't even know if he got close enough to being a bust.
Well, they had a press conference to announce the signing of a guy who never made it past the intra-squad game, so that constitutes a bust.
And it's funny, when I was talking to this guy, we were chatting about Vince Young. I still never saw Vince Young unload a pass. He never really threw a hard pass. Everything was a little short, 5 to 6, 7 yards underneath routes, middle routes. I always thought, why wouldn't he let it loose? And then he tears his hamstring in a relatively innocuous play, and we never got to final. So I've always, and maybe when someone asked me to look back my days and among questions about it, I said, I always wonder what Vince Young could have done, but we'll never find out. And I wonder, Paxton is a lot younger. I think he's 27, isn't he, Rob?
Yeah. And Vince Young was 34, I think, very early in camp that year. But, but one thing that intrigues me is, are there going to be Vince Young equivalents in that? When he showed up, at least for that press conference, he wasn't in football shape. Now, these players have had a hiatus of over a year and a half. Are there going to be any surprises when players show up and suddenly someone you thought was a defensive back looks like a defensive tackle?
Well, I think you're the only guy in COVID that lost weight.
108 pounds. 108 pounds.
So good for you, congratulations. I think I found some
pounds between Rough Rider games.
I found some of them, so bad on you. I'm not so happy with you right now, but I am interested to see what kind of shape. I'm also kind of interested to see what kind of practices we have for the first start, because as I mentioned, it's a long practice. So there could be a few days of just walkthroughs as guys get used to, they've been training and whatnot, but they get used to being on their feet, wearing cleats, wearing pads, wearing helmets. They have to adjust. And I know it's been part of their life, but it's still been 600 days since they've had, and some of them even longer, since they've had equipment on. So and
they got to hold down jobs. They're not like the NFL players who can just devote all their time, given the resources they possess, to working out. They can squeeze in some workouts, but they've still got some jobs, and a lot of them were making CFL minimum and then going back down to the States. So they have to feed their families, and that probably precludes them from spending 4 or 5 hours a day training. So that's going to be interesting.
Yeah, and I wonder. So they have to bring them on slowly, because I think you have to worry about soft tissue injuries like pulls and those kind of things as guys get used to things. And I know, some of the guys I talked to just may find this funny. Your feet get sore because you're wearing cleats, and you're standing on. The grass is pretty soft at Mosaic. It's good turf, but a minor thing like that. So it'll be interesting to see how the coaches adjust to that. I know in the past ice baths were mandatory. And you ever watch guys go into ice bath? It's not a fun thing. But Chris Jones used to have, you have to do your ice bath. So those would be things they have to get used to and have to adjust to. But I think one of the advantages is the Rough Riders have everything they're used to having at Mosaic Stadium. There's no adjusting to going to Saskatoon or Griffith Stadium and those kind of things. They're all going to be there, and all the facilities or Mosaic Stadium. And when we built this stadium, one of the reasons was to have training camps here, wasn't it? Part of them. It was, they like to go to U of S, but they want to have everything at Mosaic Stadium, and they're going to be able to do all that, which is going to be crazy.
Can you imagine trying to do all this at Taylor Field?
Oh,
good luck.
You couldn't.
Does not lend itself to social distancing at all. But beyond the quarterbacking, I mean, who's going to protect
everything's
the
fine.
quarterback?
They're all good. Everything's fine.
I think my dog made a cameo there. That was Candy, who I have not yet introduced formally.
Well, the other big question is, how do they replace Brendon LaBatte? And I know Brendon LaBatte is older and was he's on the tail end of his career, and he chose not to come back, which I think, he's opting out with the option of coming back if things change. I don't know how he can do that, but he was a big part of that offensive line. I think he's had a couple more years left in him. I still think he does have a couple of more years left in him. So, but you got the left guard, and then you go, oh no, what are they going to do? And then you think, man, what a genius move by Jeremy O'Day by signing Evan Johnson. He's a left guard. He's a stud. He's he's a U of S kid. He's only 26. He's got a huge upside against him. He's played left guard. So they park him right in at left guard, create an option now. What are they going to do at right guard? Because the things have changed a little bit. Brett Boyko is a former tackle, but he can play that spot. So I think they're kind of things. So the interior of the line would be Brett Boyko, Dan Clark, and Evan Johnson. So they're going to have they're going to keep going with that same Canadian depth. So let's give Jeremy O'Day credit for maybe possibly thinking ahead. Like Brendon LaBatte says he made the decision on the Saturday before the quarantine not to come. But I wonder if Jeremy O'Day was looking ahead and thinking, whoa, maybe this is an opportunity.
Got to remember, too, that they drafted Matlin Riley in the first round a year ago. Brendon LaBatte spoken very highly of Logan Furland. Josiah St. John is still around. And
he's a guard.
As much as he's been maligned, when they've had to plug him in, he hasn't performed terribly. So one thing about Brendon LaBatte is that you got to remember in 2019, the Riders finished first, and they didn't have him for most of the season. Now, they did have a wealth of backups. Dariush Bladek was there. Philip Blake was there. They had Dakota Shepley, who's now in the NFL. Braden Schramm. So they've lost some of the reinforcements there, but the Riders are not unaccustomed to trying to get by without Brendon LaBatte. That was most of the 2019 season. So and then they fared pretty well, obviously, without him. Now they'd be much better with him. I wonder if he might be their version of Kucherov, that at some point in the year he resurfaces as restrictions loosen up. He said he wants to spend the summer with his family and with his kids, and kudos to him for doing that. But once the fall gets here, and presumably some of the restrictions or more of the restrictions that the players are currently under will be lifted, does that create a situation whereby it's Brendon LaBatte can be, injected back into the lineup? Not unlike was the case with that. Not unlike the scenario that unfolded in 2019 when he rejoined the team after injury, after missing the first portion of the season with injury. So I don't think it's unrealistic to think they're going to get Brendon LaBatte back as life returns to normal for the players, because they're going to be under such stringent restrictions, at least in the early stages. I can see why he and others would find that unappetizing.
Well, how many guys, they kind of joke, have missed training camp on purpose because they just, what does he need to prove in a training camp? What does he need to do for all of the days that's left in training camp? But as a media guy, I always kind of liked having Brendon around, and I give him, because he was always very insightful. I remember doing negotiations of collective bargaining agreements. He understood them inside and out. Him and Jeremy O'Day used to be so helpful for us when we tried to discern, figure out what this means in the CBA. So as a media person, come on back, Brendon. We really like you, but we'll get to know Evan Johnson and these other guys. There's going to be some good changes. And I think
the other question too is who plays right tackle. I mean, Karen Vaughn will be the left tackle. Jacoby Cofield is retired. They've got a number of American tackles, and American tackles aren't the toughest guys to find. Yeah. But
I would lean towards Cameron Jefferson. If I was going to, just because he looks like he played a bit last year, and he's one of these guys. But there's also all sorts of names.
They've got guys with NFL experience there, so
they all have some NFL experience, Rob. But not a lot of great NFL experience, but they all seem to have some NFL experience.
Receiving core, I mean, they've It's experienced, but it's not. They've got arguably their two top pass catchers back in Shaq Evans and Kyran Moore. They're going to miss Naaman Roosevelt and the reliability he provided, especially on second down. He had ceased to be a downfield threat, and he only scored one touchdown, I think, in his last 20-some games with the Roughriders. So he had really stopped being a red zone threat, too. But on 2nd and 9, as a move the chains guy, he was invaluable to Cody Fajardo in 2019, as he was to Kevin Glenn and Brandon Bridge and Zach Collaros, etc. So
look at the replacement. I really think it's going to be Jordan Williams-Lambert. It's going to step there. And let's see what he can do as a slot back. He was miscast as a wide receiver. That's like kind of me being a ballerina. Just what was going on in their minds. I guess they just wanted to get him on the field and get him stuff, but he wasn't happy to be out there. He wasn't utilized out there. Bring him closer to the quarterback. Take advantage of that big body. Take advantage of that experience. Look what he did in 2018 and say, yeah, here's a guy that can maybe make some big contributions at slot back. And then there's also Justin McGinnis was another guy. McInnes was the other guy who played wide receiver. He could be moving to slot back too, the Canadian guy, him and Brendon LaBatte. They have some good Canadian talent that maybe even go that other slot back position.
Jake Hardy, Terrell Jan is going to be really interesting to watch. Yeah. He may leapfrog everyone Canadian-wise.
Can I cheer a little bit for Jake Hardy? Because I saw when he hurt his knee in that first day of training camp, I went, oh no, here's a guy. He finally gets a chance to be a free agent. Finally gets a chance to play, and he blows his knee out on the first day of training camp. And I can so close my eyes and see that and go, oh. So Jake. I don't know if he'll watch this or not, but I'm cheering for him. I he does well. Then he hurts it again the next year training for the season. Yeah. So
it's sort of a raw bag type story.
Yeah, without the good stuff in between.
Yeah. So So we've dealt with running back. William Powell is 33. He's not a real high mileage back in that his best years in the CFL started in his late 20s. So there's not the tread on the tires that one would expect from a 33-year-old, but you still don't know. When you're opening the season with a 33-year-old running back, you just don't know. 1996, Robert Mims rushed for about 1,400 yards and was named the most outstanding player in the West Division for the Roughriders. He was 32 years old. Yeah. 1997, Robert Mims returned and eventually was replaced by Mike Saunders. So 32 to 33 is an interesting transition for any player, but for a running back especially, that's a pretty precarious age. And when you consider that he hasn't played football for a year, that might be beneficial in that there's a lot of recuperative time, or it might be to his detriment in that maybe there's rust that's kicked in. Like a tenth of a second is crucial in football. And if you lose that tenth of a second, especially as a running back or as a ball carrier, you're in trouble. So
and he's kind of stocky, and I wonder what he did to keep in shape. I'm not saying that, but imagine it's a natural human action for that much time off to not train as hard. Like, how do you train knowing there's going to be a season or knowing there isn't a season? So I think that's what we got to watch for, is guys that maybe put on some weight, or maybe they're professional athletes. They know how to look after their bodies, but just see how they adjust to a whole year off and what kind of shape they show up in training camp. And I'm not insinuating they're going to show up out of shape or anything like that. I'm just saying it's human nature that, you may slack off a little because you got to work. Yeah. These guys all had to make money. They're not the NFL guys. They can't not play football and still make money. They had to work. I mean, some of the sideline jobs would be interesting to see what they did. Kind of like Charleston Hughes and Mac Henry did so many things. You'd see they were doing landscaping, cement work, brick work, anything they could do to find work in the off season just to keep money coming in.
The defensive line, you mentioned Charleston Hughes, and
who's he?
His absence. I mean, again, we talk about age. You're never really sure what you're going to get from a 37-year-old defensive end. But when Charleston Hughes was a 34-year-old defensive end and a 35-year-old defensive end, he led the league in sacks while playing for the Saskatchewan-Roughriders. Yeah. In his absence, that is a massive question hanging over this team. The Roughriders tied for the league lead in sacks each of the past two seasons, Charleston Hughes being an important part of that. In his absence, they've got to find a defensive end who can exert pressure. A.C. Leonard did a nice job of that in 2019. He was terrific, especially in the West Final against Winnipeg. But Winnipeg Hughes also had to worry about Charleston Hughes. So A.C. Leonard's not going to be getting the double teams that Charleston Hughes would have. Now he might be. What about Freddie Bishop III? Chad Jeter retiring, I think, threw a bit of a wrench into their plans, but especially since they like to go with a rotation of 3 for 2 defensive end spots. Mm-hmm. So inside, it's pretty easy to call. It'll be Mac Henry and Charbel DeBeer handling the Canadian spot, and Micah Johnson, the other tackle. Yeah. Whether he can rebound from what was not a very good 2019 season, we will see. He's now 33. But
see, I argue that with people, and because I know you watch the games differently than I do, but Micah Johnson was impactful. He just didn't have the sacks. I still think he drew.
Sign him then. Hmm? The Roughriders really showed no enthusiasm.
I know that was funny. I know, so they must. But I kind of think
they put all sorts of excuses on the table, but ultimately they opted not to bring him back after 2019. He signed with BC. So if he was the crusher that people maintain he still was, even though the numbers didn't substantiate that point, why didn't they bring him back?
That's a good point. Well, they had to spend the money around.
He's making a lot of money. They weren't going to bring him back at that salary, which tells me he did not perform to expectations, or they would have paid him for 2020 at a level that is commensurate with that performance, and they were not going to do that. So obviously, there was at least a modicum of disappointment with the manner in which he performed in 2019.
But they brought him back anyway.
Yeah, now he's back. But we'll see what.
He's also one of the good guys too. I hate to say that. He's one of the good guys on the Roughriders. Good to see him back.
But defensive end's going to be interesting. They're going to have to find somebody who can really annoy the passer, because if they can get apply pressure with 4, that just creates all sorts of opportunities for the defensive backs and the linebackers. If they have to start blitzing, and they're not obviously not averse to blitzing. Jason Shivers isn't as blitz happy as Chris Jones was, but and isn't as wild as Chris Jones was schematically. But I think a lot of the success the Riders had in 2019 defensively was because they could be pretty sure that they could apply pressure with 4 people if they needed to. Do they have that assurance now? I'm not sure they do.
Well, I think teams are they're probably hoping teams are going to have to find out where is Micah Johnson, and maybe he can regain that form where he had the 14 sacks that earned him that big salary with the Roughriders when he originally signed.
That's a big wild card.
Yeah,
if they can get the 2017 and 2018 Micah Johnson, who had this kind of sack total that one would normally associate with a defensive end, that's massive. And it's not outside of his capabilities. And if he's healthy, who knows what he can do? He's as dominant a defensive tackle as we've seen in a long time in the CFL. He just hasn't done it in Saskatchewan yet, and now he's 33 years old.
Yeah, so that you've written. I think you wrote a column on the dirty 30s in the Roughriders.
Yeah, it's 33 is an interesting age.
Linebackers, I think way back when free agents.
Oh, interesting.
Derek Moncrief, Cameron Judge, and Solly being gone. But holy smokes, is that a huge hole? And then they get Larry Dean, and I really think Dion Lacey is going to be. I know he's a little older too, but boy, there's a guy who was a stud defensive or will linebacker with the Eskimos. He was really good. And I think signing him, a late signing too, because he's played football. He spent last season with the Buffalo Bills, so he hasn't been out of football completely. I think those are 2 great signings for the linebacking core. It still questions at Sam, but that's kind of when we're looking at 3 big question marks. Now they're looking at just the one, at least in my mind.
And that one, do they go with a Canadian as they did when they had Cameron Judge?
No, but Cameron was a will. It's a little bit of different. Cameron was a will.
But do they look
Americans a Sam?
Do they look at putting a Canadian, in the linebacking trio, or do they have to
could go American?
Adjust the roster? Micah Tights started once against Calgary in 2019, played pretty well. There's some Canadian depth there. Who knows? Sometimes you look at it and you think linebackers aren't really that tough to find. You can always convert a defensive back to a linebacker and do reasonably well. Remember how the Riders turned Tad Cornegay into a linebacker and became an all-star. After 2001, George White went to the National Football League, and people are thinking, how are the Riders going to replace George White? Roy Shivers brought in Reggie Hunt, and nobody really worried about that for a long time. So Maurice Lloyd leaves after 2008. Hello there, Ray Williams. So linebackers are pretty replaceable. That's been demonstrated through time. That doesn't make it inevitable that it will happen, but it's not as difficult as finding some, say a defensive end.
Well, the thing is with the Sam linebacker, it's basically treated as a cover position. And I know last year, I remember mistakenly, I asked for the linebacker coach to do a story on Derek Moncrief. He goes, I like the guy, but Murray, he practices with the defensive backs exclusively. That's what he does. I went, oh yeah, I guess that's right. I never seen him on that. So they do treat that position as a cover position, so they can fill it with a defensive back. There's talk of Lucius Purifoy moving in there. I still think he's such a good defensive back. You don't fool around with him, but maybe he can have more of an impact up closer to the ball. But the Sam's going to be a question mark. There's a lot of guys. There's even fact got the Herman Reed twins who are there, which make a cool story. Twin brothers on the same team. I don't know if that's happened in Rough Rider history, Rob.
Can't think of it.
Not since your lifetime, so we can look that up.
That's a long time.
Yeah.
Defensive backfield. The only real question there is who plays the corner
Wide
position that was occupied by L.J. McRae.
Yeah.
Again, that's not the toughest position to find. There's even the potential of playing a Canadian there. If and when Eli Buka returns, maybe that becomes interesting. Lacombo maybe fits into that mix immediately. You can find a Canadian to play that position, and maybe that's the ratio switch. If they're going to play 3 Americans at linebacker instead of 2, maybe they flop a Canadian. Yeah. They find that Canadian spot at corner to replace L.J. McRae. Aside from that, it's pretty easy. Nick Marshall's playing corner and very well. Mike Edem will be the safety, and the defensive halfbacks will be Ed Gainey and Lucius Purifoy. So there.
Ed Gainey's a little older. Ed Gainey had an interesting 2019. I don't know if he was. They don't throw at him as much, but what's he going to show? Like what happens if guys reach a certain point. Like Lance Fraser was really good, and then he wasn't really good. So they kind of.
I'm not really too worried about Ed Gainey. I think if you're looking at Ed Gainey as a problem or a potential problem, then you really don't have problems. Is he the Ed Gainey of 2017? Probably not. But I think they'll be fine there.
I think there's no questions about the defensive backfield. Then there's depth. Lacombo's there, and all the Americans, and you look at all the Canadians and stuff. I'm just looking at my sheet here.
The special teams, there's tons of questions, which is a little surprising in light of the fact that Craig Dickinson is one of the foremost special teams coordinators in the league, and I think one of the best the league has ever had. But I'm not sure you can look at their special teams and find an area where you can feel that you can't poke holes in. And the exception I would make is punter. Now, people can look at the net punting average that John Ryan had in 2019 and say it's unspectacular. He averaged 48.8 yards a punt. And it's a team record. John Ryan really isn't a concern. Yeah, they've got who knows they've got a global punter now, but I don't think John Ryan's going to be in any danger of losing his job. Brett Lawther is a bit of an enigma in that, I mean, he kicked at 90% at a 90% accuracy rate in 2018 and almost broke Dave Ridgway's rider record in that in terms of percentage. Terrific year. One element of Brett Lawther's performance in 2019 was terrific. When called upon in the clutch, he delivered. But his overall percentage was in the 70s, and he set a much higher standard, and the standard is much higher for kickers in general. Do the Riders get the Brett Lawther of 2018 or the Brett Lawther of 2019? There's a huge difference between those two.
Yeah, that's a big question. I think there's a big question. But he was hurt a lot, and he had grip. Like if you're a kicker, if you have hip and groin injuries, those are pretty serious. He also had an eye issue too. I remember reading somewhere. So, but he's still, he's their best option because their only option is a global kicker on the team. So they did not even bring anybody in, and maybe that's a sign of the salary cap or how things are, the limitations at training camp. Because usually you bring in a couple of kickers to hang out and to see what they can do. So we'll see what happens with this global guy.
I don't really think Brett Lawther is going to be a concern. I think what they're going to get is a lot closer to 2018 than 2019, and his reliability in the clutch in 2019 should also be noted. As far as
he's also 4 for 4 in that West final too. So
yeah, and when he had that awful day against the former
Edmonton
the Edmonton team with the previous moniker. But he ended up kicking the game winner, what turned out to be the game winner in that one too. The return specialist, interesting. Kyran Moore can return punts pretty well. He took 2 for touchdowns in 2018. Lucius Purifoy, when the Riders have used him on kickoff returns, has been effective. Took one to the house in 2019. So did Marcus Thigpen, but he's no longer here, and his effectiveness really had diminished as a punt returner in 2019. So I think Craig Dickinson has said, and you've written, that they'd like to have a full-time return specialist
who backs up,
who can back up somewhere else. Who that might be, good question.
Well, you look at the running backs. There's names that I throw out there: Jamal Moore, Carlos Henderson. Carlos Henderson's a receiver. They've done it. And you look through the defensive backs, they all returned punts and kicks in college or high school or a little bit in the NFL. There's another guy.
I want an offensive player as a returner. These guys are on defense for a reason.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm just trying to think. I've forgotten the guy's name who I threw out in my.
But they're gonna need much better return game.
Well, it's all about their punt. They're not the average. They're last in the league with punt returns. I'm just trying to find this.
As far as the kick coverage, I mean, there was a real propensity for allowing big plays via returns in 2019, and that has to stop.
5 touchdowns on kick returns. That's a big.
That was ugly.
I kind of think we forget about that. Like, it's funny, they got so good over the days off. Over this long stretch, the Riders went from a team that lost the Western Final to they kind of, in some people's minds, almost won the Grey Cup. They just seem to have improved so much because they haven't played. So we've just been looking. Does that make sense to you? You know what I'm trying to say? That we've had so much speculation on what they are and talking.
Well, you're saying they're bringing this guy back. They're bringing this guy back. They had this good season overall, and they brought back most of the core. But that's also a core that didn't get to the Grey Cup. And there's some, as is always going to be the case, there's some question marks. And the Rough Riders also dealt with some fortuitous circumstances in 2019, in that they never beat the Calgary Stampeders. They were 0-2 against them, but they didn't have to play the Calgary Stampeders in the playoffs. They ended up playing Winnipeg, and that didn't go very well either. But they still got to prove that they can beat Calgary with this group. And I don't care who Calgary has at camp, and their receiving core, for example, doesn't include the big names that it once did. But I'm always going to look at Calgary and think that's where the bar is going to be set, because they're going to bring in people. Edmonton, they look like they're loaded on offense. And Jamie Elizondo is there, Trevor Harris. They've got such a good receiving core. So I think, Winnipeg's a big question, because who knows how long Zach Claros is going to be able to play. That's such a wild card. But with the quarterbacks going down left and right in 2019, that created some circumstances. I'm not taking anything away from how the Riders did in 2019, but the landscape of the division also allowed them to do what they did. And so if we're dealing with an all things being equal situation, and a lot of the uncertainty over the past year and a half and the hiatus, it's really tough to say how the horse race is going to shape up this year. Just because the Rough Riders finished first in 2019 doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be among the top teams in 2021. They need some good luck, and they need some good fortune, and so do the teams that they rival, because the Riders dealt with a lot of the other West Division teams dealt with a lot of adversity that year.
Well, the BC Lions are going to be better. Their offensive line would struggle quite a bit in the first part of the season. Actually, it was horrible in the first part of the season. And don't call me Mike O'Reilly is going to be on his feet a whole lot more. That's a little joke there. I just thought I wanted to just use that. The Lions are going to be better, so they're not going to be as the Riders are going to have a little more competition in the division. I think it's going to be a competitive division. It's only 14 games, boy, and no preseason, so you can't really, 18 games. You kind of had 2 games to kind of lollygag your way into the season, because you still had a good chance to make the playoffs while you were still finding yourself. I think it's going to be 14 season. Put your foot to the gas, and you got to go. So there's going to be more incentive on getting off to a good start. You lose 2 or 3 in a row to kick off the season, and especially with the Riders with their home-loaded schedule, which they really like. They love having home games in the summer, as much as people say.
But you're not going to be able to feast on the East as much because of the imbalanced schedule. You got 3 games against the Calgary Stampeders in succession, and that's a team they still haven't beaten under this regime. So they're going to face some challenges that they didn't encounter in 2019.
I know this is taking us back to another spot, but I wonder what the impact of not having any preseason games is going to be on the product come the regular season.
I would think not much. What, did you watch the NFL last year?
Not the, yeah, it kind of went, it's true too.
They really didn't have a lot of issues. I'd be just as happy to dispense with it every year.
Oh, yeah. I know
But
it's not rider related, but no, finally this XFL talk is over.
oh,
It's
thank
over.
goodness.
Thank God. Praise the football gods. What I remember,
What
and I
a
still keep
mess.
talking
What
about
an
it when that press
unnecessary
release came out.
diversion. Sorry, what's that?
When that press release came out, I remember calling you and saying, "I don't understand what this is all about." And
Yeah.
finally, it was talking to talk to talk, and I realize, and I understand the CFL has got to find other streams of revenue. That's the part of the global incentive. Like they've tapped everything you can in Canada right now. So they have to find other ways to bring in money in regards to whatever business model they're working on. And I understand that. But I just thought this XFL talk was almost ludicrous and it wasted a lot of time was devoted to it. And I kept going, well, I don't see it going away. And finally, the right decision was made. But maybe by looking at the XFL, the CFL looked further inside, did some navel gazing, and saw what things they can do, what things they can take from that product, and maybe market itself. But let's just concentrate on the football the Rough Riders have, the CFL has right now, and worry about the XFL kind of thing a little bit later. But another thing, and I'm going to throw this.
It was good that they got that out of the way before the training camps began, because there wasn't that wasn't going to be hovering. And I think some of the stories that would have been done early in the season, eventually somebody's going to start talking to some of the Canadian players and saying, okay, are you worried that beyond this season there won't be jobs for Canadians or starting positions for Canadians if this XFL model takes shape? I think now they can look forward and know what their model is going to be, even structurally, and that distraction is gone. What bothers me is that a league that constantly talks about accessibility and transparency still has yet to explain really what they were talking about, why they were talking with them, and why these talks came to an end. I'm sick of the double talk. If you're going to talk about being as transparent as you portray yourselves as being, well, maybe actually walk that talk. It's ludicrous that it was announced so vaguely and disposed of so vaguely. Address it. Yeah. And that's one of the failings of the Canadian Football League as a whole. And one of the things I think they need to look at as they move forward. I think they've got to re-engage with a lot of people, fans, media. I think they've got to redouble their efforts to get themselves as deeply into the football community as they can. And I'm not just talking about their constituency. They've got who they've got as a fan base, and it's a pretty significant fan base, even if it doesn't have the demographic. Doesn't have the demographic necessarily that they want, and it's not as big as they want. It's still significant, and it will still support the product loyally to a certain threshold. You've got that. You're going to get a certain number of people in Winnipeg, Calgary, Edmonton, Hamilton, Ottawa. You're pretty sure that there's some markets that are going to give you enough to be sustainable. Yeah, there's some problem areas, but how much have they marketed the team in BC? How much did they market the Toronto Argonauts in the latter years that David Braley was there? They lament the result while basically perpetuating the result by not marketing the team and not pushing it. So yeah, they talk about how the business model is flawed and they want to have a better business model. But where was this awareness and where was this proactiveness at a time when it was still apparent that the business model was flawed? Because in many cases they weren't marketing the team, or if they were, it was marginally. Let's get out there. Let's market the teams. Let's re-engage with the media. There's so many kids playing flag football and touch football. There's a female football constituency. There's so many new Canadians. My mom and dad moved to Canada in 1956. They'd never heard of the Saskatchewan-roughriders. In 1957, mom went to every game. She loved it. She was a new Canadian. They engaged my mom. Eventually, I became a fan. Yes, this is a rant, but get yourselves embedded in the Canadian football community as a whole. Talk to Jim Mullen with Football Canada. Talk to Michael Thomas with Saskatchewan Amateur Football. Just entrench yourself and work with them. You've got a built-in audience of young fans who are playing flag football, playing tackle football, playing whatever, touch football. Get them interested in your product so that they're playing Canadian flag football, but they're wearing an Aaron Rodgers jersey. Make them fans of Cody Fajardo. You've got that opportunity because your players are accessible. So use that to your advantage. And have they done that satisfactorily? Not even close. So yeah, the business model needs some addressing. And yeah, the demographic isn't what they want. But that's not the fault of the people who are younger who aren't going or who aren't interested. That is the fault of the Canadian Football League and the member teams for not reaching out to that constituency that's already played that card and showed that they're interested in football but they're not engaging with them. And that has to change. And if it doesn't, the CFL is going to be consistently at this level where it's below the threshold that it covets. That's my speech for the day.
I don't think we, Rob, I know you're supposed to, I don't think we can end on a better note.
That was a really good rant.
I think it was about 3 minutes.
That went on forever. That was a
take a breath.
Sorry about that.
So I think we should end on that note. So we can talk over each other.
This drives me nuts.
Anyway, I think we should end on that note. I think that's a strong, solid ending. You don't like to bury the lead, but that's
my dog. There she is. There's Candy, who is somehow managing to stay conscious.
Move it over so we see her face. How come she got gray hair like you? I guess, A little bit of gray.
Well, she's lived with me for 2.5 months. I'm surprised. It's not all gray. So, thank you for being with me for that last little rant. I wasn't expecting to go off on that tangent, but it just bugs me. So,
okay,
I feel much lighter and cleansed now.
I forgot. Are you going to read the?
We've got the message. We got the public service announcement. Mark Melnichuk, our producer, has implored us to read this. Do you want to handle the nouns and I'll do the verbs, or how should we do this? Let me find this. I've got it. Here we go. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. I have no idea what Stitcher is. And what's Twitch? What is Twitch? If you'd like to send us a question, you can email me. It's rvanstone@postmedia.com, and we'll read it on the show. You can follow me at Rob Vanstone or Murray at Murray LP. And thanks to my dog, it's a podcast. So, Murray, please save us.
And let people know that I guess we can say starting Tuesday, we're back weekly. I don't know if we'll have rants like that by Rob everyone to conclude our podcast, but starting Tuesday, we'll have actually some observations from training camp to provide people and give them a good idea what's going on, and just maybe give people our paper a plug. You got to read the Leader Post. We're both going to be out there. Our brothers up north are going to be also helping out with the coverage, so we're going to be as much coverage as we can. We're going to make up for 600 days of missed football by filling every nook and cranny and finding everything we can to do about the Rough Riders.
There won't be cyberspace left once we're done. So.
And I'm really interested to see what Cody Fajardo does, and we're going to be watching him a lot. So I know it may be overkill, but he's going to be a focus of a lot of attention, and rightfully so, as he gets his chance to be the first starter right from the word go, and to see if we can take him and hopefully miss the goalpost this time when he throws the pass for Kyron Moore.
Awesome. For Murray McCormick and Candy, look at her. I'm Rob Vanstone. Thanks for being with us, and we'll do this again every Tuesday, and as long as we continue to breathe. Take care, and have a great day.